What's going on? Welcome back to my channel. So, in this video, I'm going to do a guide to Flexbox. This isn't mine, obviously, but I'm going to go over it, and this is going to help you understand the layouts I'm going to show you. Kind of like a refresher for me. In my last video, which I'll link in the description, I talked about Flexbox and like the basics of it, but I didn't go in as in depth as I would like to. But this guide does it perfectly. Even like the whole terminology for the actual Flexbox container. I'm gonna simplify this. So this is a Flexbox container. So whenever you do flex or you like container or you make row flex, these are the this is the item, and then these are the items, and this is the actual container. And inside the container there is the main axis which goes across. And then there's the cross axis which goes from top to bottom. We also have these. So the start of the main, the end of it, start of the cross, end of the cross. See, very important for what I'm going to show. So let's go down to Flexbox properties. And the way they have it is set up. There's properties for the parent, which is the container, and then properties for the children, the flex items. So whenever I compare to anything with Flexbox, and there's a parent class and a children class, or I say parent and children, that's what I'm referring to. So there's display, obviously. If you want to do flex, display flex. And this, like I said, defines flex, enables all of the children to be flex. Flex direction. So this is the default, which is flex row. Then there's row reverse, which does in reverse order. Then there's column, and there's column reverse. And right here, left to right, right to left, top to bottom, and then bottom to top. And then you got flex wrap, which I don't think I went over in the last one. Wrap. So yeah, actually I did, yeah. By default, the items try to fit onto one line. And then if you do wrap, you allow them to take up as much space as they need. If it overflows the amount of space on the line, then it goes down to the next line. And then wrap reverse reverses the order of the wrap. So the item that normally would be last will be first. And you got flex flow. The interesting thing about Flexbox, just CSS in general, they're shorthands. So flex flow is a shorthand for flex direction and flex wrap. So instead of having two separate values, properties and values, you can have them in one line of code. It just saves you a little bit of time. Anytime you do shorthands, you probably should do it. Let's see, justify content. So this is along the main axis. Oh, actually, a point I forgot to show really quickly is the main axis changes. I think it goes over it actually. The main axis changes based on how you set the flex box. So if you set it to flex column, the main axis, let's use an example. The main axis is now top to bottom instead of left to right. So left to right is row, top to bottom is column, main axis. And the way I like to think of it is the main axis is always the longest side of the shape. Let's say it's always a rectangle in this case, even if it's the longest side. And the cross axis is the smallest side. Here is cross start, cross end. That's the way I think about it. Let's get back to this. So justify content. They start on the main axis in a row. Starts at the very left. All the contents aligned to the left. Flex in, all the contents aligned to the right. Centered along the axis. There's equal space in between and no space on the left and right. Equal space on the left and right, equal space in the middle, and then space evenly. Everything has the exact amount of space. But for layout purposes like navbar, space between is what you're going to use the most. Every now and then you use like flex center, flex start. You're not really going to use space around and space evenly. They just don't look very well on layouts. but get more into that later. Items versus flex direction. Let's see, space tuning. That's it for that. Align items, and these, okay, so yeah, align items are on the cross axes. So default, when you say we're in default here, everything here is in a row unless it says, yeah. So top to bottom starts at the top of the axis, center, end of the axis, stretch, then baseline. So every, yeah, like all of the text or whatever's in there, they all end here, like an imaginary line, and the content stays on that line. And then we got align content, which is also on the cross axis. And this is when there's a lot of content. Like I said, align content. This isn't just one item. So if you have a couple children, you align them to the start, align it to the end, exact same thing, just different content. Like, see, let's say these are all paragraphs. Some was like grid, how you'd have multiple things, equal space, space between, stretch. That's it. You can always come through. You can go on this site and look at these and read them if you want more in depth. I'm kind of just going over them really quickly. Gap, very important. Gap is the easiest way to add space between your content, whether that's paragraphs, pictures. You add a gap and it adds space, however much space you need, and it doesn't matter your orientation. It doesn't matter if you're in a column or a row. It will add space depending on how you set it up. And then there's row gap and column gap, which I'm not sure. Okay, it's doing it here. So this gap between, this is row gap. I don't know why it doesn't say it, but this is row gap. So in between the rows, these are two rows. This is column gap. This has the row of column top to bottom. Space here and space here. So yeah, you can see how this is very useful for easily like making layouts. Let's quickly go back up to the children. There's not as many properties, but there's order. Order is essentially the same as z index, but actually no, it's not. No. Z index is for like bringing things to the front and all that. Order is basically you have these things, put in whatever order you want. You want the second thing to be there. Yeah, if you want something to be first, if something's last but you want it to be first, all you have to do is put order one. Normally you just want to do, always want to start with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just to keep it simple. You don't want to have random numbers. Yeah, property order in which they appear in the flex. These are interesting. Flex grow, like I said here, defines the ability for a flex item to grow if necessary. So if this isn't active, then your item won't grow. Like by default, it's set to 0, meaning it's not allowed to grow at all. Whether or not you put it to 1, 2, 3, 4 doesn't matter, because actually no, it matters. If there's one item, it doesn't matter. But if there's multiple items, then it does matter, because like it says here, if one has a value of 2 and the other one has 1 or something like that, it will take up twice as much space as the others. So if there's 4 children, one takes up 2 spaces, the other 2 take up 1 and 1. That's not correct math, or it is, but basically, higher the number, the more space it takes up, which is very common in like grid, the way you set up your things. A lot of times though, you're gonna just want to do flex, set it to flex 1, and all of them are the same in space. Then there's flex shrink. By default, everything shrinks. Default's 1, and I think it's just an order thing, because a lot of times I've never used anything greater than 1 honest. I mean, I've done higher than one for grow, but as far as shrink, I've always put either one. Yeah, I've always put one. I've never had to where I didn't want anything to shrink. It's like very specific. Like you kept it. You want to keep it at that exact size. That would make sense. Flex basis. This one's interesting. Flex basis is basically how much. Well, let me read here what it says first. Actually, before I just say something. Defines the default size. Okay, yeah. So you can pick this. You can pick the size of how you want something. I will just make a lot more sense in the layouts that I'm going to show you. Yeah, this defines the default size element before the remaining space is distributed. It can be a length or a keyword. Auto keyword is look at my width or height property. The content keyword means size is based on the item content. You don't really use that much. That could come in handy though. Or tests. This is posted a couple years ago, so it honestly probably is fine to use content now. But I don't know. I just use something like 300 pixels, or like I'll use either pixels or M or rem. And that basically like, okay, this item is gonna be this size, and it's gonna stay that size, or it's either gonna be a specific size, or it's gonna take up this length, or it's gonna take up 20% of the page, or 40% of the page. So that goes very well with growing. It grows, but it's still staying at that 40%. Then we got flicks, another shorthand, very helpful. I use this one quite often. So for flex, all you have to know is the order is flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis. And so everything I just said before, the default is 0 1 auto. So 0 flex grow, 1 flex shrink. So it's not allowed to grow, it's allowed to shrink. And auto basically means that the content will take up as much space as needed. Yeah, let's get it in. If you set the value number like 5, the flex basis will be 0 because it sets the flex grow to 5 and 1 shrink will be 1 and 0. So basically these are defaults. So if you set flex and just a number by itself, it will automatically go to grow. So it's saying I want it to grow, it can shrink as well. And actually, I'm not sure why flex basis is 0. I'll have to do some looking into that. I should know this, but I don't. I'm guessing. Actually, no. I think 0 is the same as auto, which seems weird, but as far as I know from the projects I've done, I've tested this. Actually, I tested for 0 is the same as auto. I just don't get it, but I don't know. It works. Recommended is use the shorthand property. Yeah, the shorthand property is really good. And then last but not least, actually no, it is. Yeah, it's the last one. Align self. This is basically if you want a very unique layout, and like it says here, everything's set flex start, and this last item is set to flex in. It's just for one particular like piece of content or a paragraph inside of a parent, but specifically the child, one child class. So a couple items, you change that specific item, align self, where you want to align it. And yeah, I actually have another example. I had to set it up really quick, and once I set that up, it'll be the layouts, and I will show you all of this put into action. So we have our even columns. Let me go ahead and get rid of this really quick. I'll be using that in a little bit. Delete this as well. And then we'll get back to that. For now, so we have these set up. Let me add some more padding and come back and mess with that later as well. So we have this padding and showing the columns. We don't have any extra code in here for now, but I'm going to explain these two lines of code Well, I explain this and then I'll come in here and add some code to this. Basically, display flex. How I explain flex is like we're gonna take the least amount of space as possible. We're allowed to shrink, and it won't grow unless you set it to flex grow and allow it to grow. So now we have that, and let's say we want obviously we want it to look like this. We want it to take up more space. So we come in here, even columns, and grab the direct children, and we're gonna come in here with a flex basis of 100%. And what this means is the children all want to be 100%, so they're gonna be 100%. And probably run into, right, is thinking, okay, three, I want a column, I want 3 columns, and I want them to be 30%. The problem with this is the second that you say, okay, I want to do 2 columns instead of 3. Now you come in here and it's no longer complete. Now it's like, okay, they're only taking as much space as they need and they're not allowed to grow. And you want to simplify it, instead of coming here and putting like flex grow and allow it to grow, there's a way easier solution. Well, you can do this how I had it before, just put it to 100%. Now it's saying we want to take be 100%, but we can't, so we're just going to get right next to each other and take up as much space as possible and also be equal. And so no matter how many of these I have, I can come in here. No matter what, these will always be the exact same size. I don't know why this isn't working how it's supposed to work, but or look how it's supposed to look, but yeah. Even if you add content in, it'll look the exact same. So you lorem 25, lorem 10. So it looks really nice. Everything's centered. Get rid of that. And that's everything for columns. Just making sure you know that by default, with just display flex, they're not allowed to grow, but they're allowed to shrink. Come here, flex basis, and then pick how you want it to grow. If you want everything to be equal and just look nice, always set this to flex basis 100%. So we got flex grid, and this one basically is, so we got set it to flex display. We're gonna set the flex wrap to wrap. Basically similar to grid. As you add more content, it'll adjust. And so with flex grid, this is gonna be a look. It's gonna look similar to grid. And so the grid layout, which I'll eventually get to. But for now, I'm focusing more on like just Flexbox and layouts. But I will soon make a grid video because grid is a more recent look at CSS and like a better, not a better, but grid is basically better for large website layouts, and Flexbox is more used for like simple things like this, like showing demonstrations and things like that, making components. But in terms of the actual layout of a website, grid is almost always going to be your go-to unless it's like a very small site and you need something quick. But for this, let's set the same thing. Come here and grab all the children. Before that, we're going to set this to wrap so that you get that grid look of actual website. So I set this to wrap. This basically, you're not going to see anything now, but once I do this, I'm going to do the flex shorthand, went over, set this to grow, allow it to grow, allow it to shrink, and set it to 20em. This basically means this is the initial size that starts out with, and since we have grow and shrink, it's going to stray away from that. But the second that it's no longer 20, it's going to break onto new now. Now it's 20, then it's going to grow, it's going to shrink, it's going to shrink. Then once it's that, Now it's allowed to be 20 again. Keep growing, keep growing. 20. Just taking up the space because basically it doesn't want to get too big. They can even do this. It doesn't have to just be that. It can be, I can do some similar 15 rim. The same exact thing. Just looks different. If it's not big enough, you won't get that same look. Like it gets smaller right there. Similar, but it's not taking as much space, so it's kind of smaller. Depending on how much content you need, do some bigger, or you can do like 25 rim. It should give a similar look. Yep. Just messing around with that, seeing how you want your content to be. Then we can come in here, same thing. Flex wrap, wrap. And then for this, we're gonna set this. Let me make that bigger. We're gonna set this to flex spaces. And we're gonna set this to 70%. And we're gonna set this one to 30%. Point of this is the content sidebar. Your content is going to take up more space than your sidebar. This is additional content on the side. You come here and mess with this. You can add like gap in here, gap of 5 rim if you wanted to. It's not showing for some reason. Oh, because it would go here. That's my. I wouldn't do 5 rim. That's a lot of gap. You just come in here and do like 1 rim. Actually, no. Let's take the wrap off. You don't need a wrap for this. There we go. If you want to add space. Same thing for this. Different ways to customize this, make it look different how you want it. Same thing with this. You can add different things that have to be percentages. It can be 500 pixels, and this can be 200 pixels. But the only thing with this is it doesn't really adjust well. So for these, I would either recommend percent or even just doing rim. Even rim's kind of weird. I'm not even sure. Let me mess around with this really quick. Let's do like 25 rim and do like 15 rim. Yeah, that just makes it a little too complicated. I would just stick with something like this. Doesn't have to be those exact numbers. You can even come in and do like 60, 30. This gap off. I don't really like how that looks. Similar thing. Get smaller, get smaller, get smaller. But yeah, that's pretty much it for these. This is something you can quickly come back to, copy this code and mess around with it and use for simple projects you want to use. Add content in here. Add pictures. Anything really. And that looks really nice. Just come in here. This is something you can use for displaying information. It looks nice. Everything is the exact same size. Yeah.